The issues at Manchester United right now are complex, but the underlying constant that makes them all worse is a lack of leadership. And while an argument can be made about the on-field leadership issue, the bigger problem is in the technical box. Erik ten Hag, for all of his talents otherwise as a tactical football coach, is simply not a good leader. And it's caused Manchester United's squad that already has some holes to underachieve and further lower their already plummeting standard of excellence. We're going to dive into why that is and what Manchester United can do about it next, here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. Welcome back to Pints and Punditry here at the Pitchside Pub, where today we're going to dive into the mess that has been Manchester United this season. And of course, it's very important to remember that it's only a mess by their own lofty standards, which are of course the result of a legendary history. For most other clubs, being in the thick of a battle for European spots in the Premier League table would be a perfectly acceptable place to find oneself. But this is not any other club. This is the legendary Manchester United, where everyone is held to a higher standard, and that's why manager Erik ten Hag also needs to be held accountable for his actions, mainly those off the pitch, not his decisions on it. But before we dive in any further, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below. Hit that like button while you're at it. It really does help the channel. Please get in that comment section and let me know your thoughts on what I'm saying in this video. This is going to be a very divisive topic. I know not everybody's going to agree with me, particularly when we get into talking about Jadon Sancho, and that's fine. I want to hear your comments. Get down in that comment section. And of course, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at the Pitchside Pub. Now, I want to make it very clear. Erik ten Hag is clearly a very talented football coach with a track record of success, most recently at Ajax, where he led the Dutch Giants to multiple Eredivisie titles, and of course the historic run to the Champions League semifinals in 2019. Yet he finds himself on the hot seat as Manchester United sits on the cusp of Premier League European qualification spots, and more importantly have been riddled with the types of embarrassing controversies that simply didn't used to happen at the storied club. It's one thing to underachieve, but it's another to have former stars calling you out left and right for things happening in your own dressing room. And that's more likely to happen at Manchester United because anywhere you look in punditry circles, there's former Red Devils thanks to the residual fame that came from their glory 2 decades ago. So the list of grievances surrounding ten Hag are growing and are getting longer and longer, and they are completely self-inflicted. From blaming the officials for losses on multiple occasions rather than holding himself and his players accountable, to banning the media from press conferences because they wrote articles critical to his handling of the dressing room, thus fulfilling that prophecy on his own, to calling out an opposing player before a match only to watch that young player take the high road on him. He's openly blamed injuries for their struggles as though United are the only club that's had to deal with them. And of course, finally, there is the egregious handling of the Jadon Sancho situation, which I know I'm in the minority on, but I personally think Erik ten Hag has handled the Jadon Sancho situation about as incorrectly as he possibly could, and we're going to get into that in greater detail later in the video. Now, these issues are all leadership-oriented. His issues are not tactical. I do not for a second believe any argument that the tactics that worked for him at Ajax for some reason won't work in the Premier League. Now, you can make the argument that he doesn't have the talent level to pull them off, and that would have some merit, some of which is his own fault and some of which is not. But I don't believe for a second that he's not well versed enough in the game's strategies to get Manchester United where they need to be. That is not the issue here. No, his issues are in man management. More specifically, how he manages his men publicly to the media. Leadership is all about accountability. Erik ten Hag is known for holding his players to a very high standard, and he has a reputation for being a strict taskmaster type manager in training, and he has a very my way or the highway type philosophy. We even saw glimpses of that last season when Cristiano Ronaldo was sent packing for running his mouth to the media, and credit where it's due to Erik ten Hag for having the strength and fearlessness to take on a player like Cristiano Ronaldo. Not every manager would have done that. but his application of accountability is inconsistent, and Ten Hag's own personal insecurities have shown their face too often, particularly to the media, and it discredits the strength he's trying to show. On 2 separate occasions this season, Ten Hag has used his post-game press conference to blame officiating and specific decisions for a loss rather than show accountability. In September, after a 3-1 loss to Arsenal, he said, quote, "The performance was all right from us. I thought we played a very good game, but everything went against us. Then you don't win the game." Now, clearly everything, quote everything, never goes against one team. But even if Ten Hag had some validity behind his criticisms, there are better ways to handle this publicly that hold yourself and your team accountable. He did the same thing after United's loss to Copenhagen in the Champions League a few months later, saying, quote, "We are winning the game and the red card changes everything. We concede 2 goals that should not count, 4 penalties against us in 4 games, and 2 or 3 are very debatable. The game can't be like this." Well, yeah, a red card did change things, but where's the accountability for that red card? Taking zero accountability for the fact that his team conceded the 2-goal lead to a team they should have no problem beating in Copenhagen, and the fact that his own players' mistakes were what led to both playing down a man and giving up the goals. Look, officials have their issues, and it has not been a banner year in the Premier League, in the Champions League, or for officials across the board. And every single manager feels aggrieved in some way, and they're all correct to various degrees, even Ten Hag. The difference is in how each of them handles the situations, both in their dressing room and to the public. And Ten Hag continues to strike out. In October, before another Champions League match, Erik Ten Hag was given a pre-game interview, and unprompted, he said Bayern Munich fullback Alphonso Davies was, quote, "not a great defender." Now, Ten Hag was discussing matchups in the upcoming game, but his bluntness raised some eyebrows, and while a lot will just chalk this up to the stereotype of, quote, being Dutch, in the rest of the world it just comes off like a bully. Then, to make matters worse, when asked about it, the 23-year-old Davies took the high road and refused to engage, making Ten Hag look even worse. This is an issue, it was a small issue, that it just didn't need to take place. But heaven forbid the media point these things out too aggressively, because if they do, if they're too critical of Ten Hag, they might be banished from his treasured press conferences. And that's not hyperbole, that's actually what happened in early December after some reporters wrote an article that he was beginning to lose the United locker room. Ten Hag argued that reporters should have run the story by him first, which of course is absolutely not their obligation, and they obviously knew he would have shot the story down. To double down on the story by banning reporters only added fuel to the fire and put Erik Ten Hag's insecurities on full display to the media, which were already discussing them. But it's the excuse making that's even worse. After United's recent loss to Nottingham Forest, Ten Hag said, quote, "No team could have dealt with the injuries that we had," rather than acknowledging that even with injuries, a massively more well-funded United second team should still have been able to handle Forest. Not to mention his complete ignorance to the fact that other clubs have also been decimated by injuries this season. Tottenham, for example, have lost their entire back line, yet Ange Postecoglou isn't making these kinds of excuses. At different times this year, Newcastle United hasn't even been able to fill an entire bench with first-team players, having to have academy guys dress, yet Eddie Howe pushes forward. Right across town, Manchester City hasn't had the same level of injuries as some of these other clubs, but at different times they've been missing multiple top 5 Ballon d'Or winners in the same game, and yet they're still overcoming. Yet according to Erik Ten Hag, no team could have dealt with what Manchester United is dealing with. It's really hard to hold your players accountable when you are constantly claiming to be the victim. Good leaders do not play the victim card. And yet accountability is what Ten Hag wanted from Jadon Sancho when he called him out publicly in a post-game interview, leading to what has now become a months-long feud that is only going to end when one of the two is sent away. For those unfamiliar, the short version is this. Erik Ten Hag was asked in a post-game interview why Jadon Sancho wasn't on the bench, why he wasn't dressed for the game, why he wasn't a part of the active roster. He could have said something generic like, well, we've got a deep roster here at Manchester United, there's a lot of competition for playing time, Jadon's a valuable part of the team, he's fighting for a spot, blah, 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 help the players save face. He could have taken that road, but he didn't. He chose to call out the 23-year-old Sancho to the media and blame his lack of selection from the team's active roster on his lackluster week of training. Now, that's actually fine. I don't have a problem with that in and of itself. It's a more volatile approach than he could have chosen, but perhaps he had already tried his more subtle options and they had failed. Or maybe he's just this blunt of a guy. Either way, my issue isn't necessarily that he chose to air his grievances with Sancho publicly and call out a young player in the media. If he thinks that's the best option, well, that's his call as manager. It doesn't really matter if the rest of us agree with it. But then you can't be shocked, and you certainly can't be upset, when the player chooses to retaliate in the same manner. Sancho responded to the comments via social media and essentially called Ten Hag a liar, putting the player and the manager into a he-said situation. Except one of the he-saids has all the power, and he decided to bully the other. So rather than attempt to downplay or dissipate the situation and get the most out of his young player, Ten Hag decided to banish Jadon Sancho. Not just refuse to play him, not put him on the bench, but actually banish him from the grounds. He banned Sancho from the first team area of the complex and forced him to go train with the under-23 academy players. He's not even allowed in the first team cafeteria. He has to go eat with the younger team too, and all because Sancho won't apologize publicly. That's what Ten Hag has said. He just wants a public apology. Now, I support taking a hard line with players to help maintain control. After his interview with Piers Morgan, it was clear that Cristiano Ronaldo thought he was bigger than the team, bigger than the manager, bigger than the club. Ten Hag was right to stop that, but Ten Hag also had not started it. Cristiano Ronaldo started that. In this case, Erik Ten Hag threw the first punch. He made any issues that he had with Sancho public when he did not have to. He chose to take his problems with Sancho's training to the media. Then he turned around and became a petulant child when Sancho landed a punch in return. And because he wields all the power here, he's using it to embarrass a young player. This is not a teaching moment. This is not about holding a young player accountable. He just wants Sancho to come running back with his tail between his legs, begging for forgiveness, and then he wants to parade Sancho around publicly to show everybody he was right, and that he's the real big man in the United locker room. Except it's not true. And Sancho is absolutely right to tell him to shove it. Sancho's going to get his transfer. He's going somewhere. He's going to get a chance to play. He'll probably resurrect his career. He'll probably go on to some success. But at the moment, it doesn't look like Erik Ten Hag is going to be at Manchester United that much longer than Jadon Sancho. It is hard to remember a more petulant act by a manager toward his own player with as little justification. There are more than enough issues to deal with when managing one of the biggest clubs in the world, particularly when you are losing. Yet Erik Ten Hag went out of his way to create controversy where one did not need to exist. That is not what leaders do. Leaders do not enact punishments for the purposes of revenge or embarrassment. They only do it to help a player grow. Leaders do not project blame outward, but they accept responsibility for it. Leaders protect those they lead. They do not throw them under the bus. Leaders do not make excuses. They overcome them. Erik Ten Hag knows his football, but his handling of his players and the media is what is dividing the United locker room. Manchester United are underachieving, and while Erik Ten Hag makes every excuse in the book, the rest of us need to look no further than the manager. Managers get all the credit when a team wins. They love the glory. They love to put it on themselves. But if they're going to do that, they have to accept the blame when things go wrong. And until Erik Ten Hag begins to do that, it will continue to be an era of turmoil at Old Trafford. I would love to get your comments on this. Manchester United fans, fans of other clubs, get in that comment section. I know most people are putting the blame on Sancho, and he does have some fault here, but Erik Ten Hag had the chance to be the bigger man, and he went the opposite direction. And I hold him accountable for that. But I would love to get your thoughts. Get in that comment section. If you don't already subscribe to the channel by now, make sure you get down there and hit that subscribe button for me. And of course, follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry. This is the Pitchside Pub.